So we've got a couple of great guests with us here tonight to talk a little bit about personal branding and career planning. Just really from personal experience. These aren't HR professionals per se. These are folks that are out there doing it and making it happen. And this is just part of our Future of Work series that we've been doing, putting together and talking about a number of topics. The kind of the topic areas that we've been focusing around. There's been a lot of talk around the changing nature of work and how jobs are changing in that respect as automation and AI comes in. The changing nature of the worker, how career planning changes when jobs are not jobs anymore, and they're portfolio jobs or they're freelance jobs, or you don't stay in a career for 30, 40 years anymore. So looking at those issues. The third is the changing nature of the changing nature of the workplace. So we're here at LMHQ, a co-working space. We were at WeWork last year. So just thinking about, like, this is the future office, right? This is the office this is how the workplace is changing. And then finally, as educators, how do we take all those things and put those together to help change the changing nature of preparation and planning for careers? And that's what we're going to focus in on tonight. So I'm very pleased to introduce our panelists here this evening. And I think you all know me, so I can skip past this one. I'd like to introduce first Mr. Robert Burton, Head of Waze Mid-Market North America from Google. Please give him a round of applause. I'd next like to introduce Jennifer Stredler, Vice President of Workforce Development from Salesforce.org. Finally, our third panelist is Mr. Jonathan Stone, New Business Development Manager of Travel Partnerships from Facebook. So, welcome to each of you. And tonight we're going to be talking about, as I mentioned, the personal branding and career planning. And I'm going to use a kind of a kickoff question here. I'm going to have them introduce themselves and a little bit about what they do and give their response to this question. So the first question that we're going to answer tonight is, does a resume matter anymore? We're really moving into an era where it may or may not have as much relevance as it's had, so I would love to hear from our panelists. So, Robert, you want to kick us off?
Yeah, so I usually go by Rob, but...
I'll go with Rob as well.
I work at Google, as was mentioned. Specifically what I do is I actually head up our mid-sized, medium-sized business advertising within the United States, specifically for Waze, which is the navigation app that hopefully you all use and love, right?
I just downloaded it today.
Yeah, so that's what I do. I've been at Google for 5 years now. I'm also a Google interviewer on the side. So I also evaluate candidates for different roles within Google. Prior to that, I launched my own company. I was selling kosher meat online. I launched a national company. We were kind of the Omaha Steaks of the kosher world. So I did that for about 4 years, and then prior to that, I was working at a marketing agency. So I've kind of been in different places. Do we all want to start off?
Yeah, sure. Let's go through and get a quick introduction, and we'll dive into those. So, Jennifer?
Sure. Hi there. Happy to be here. I'm Jen, or Jennifer.
We'll go with Jen.
Either way. I lead our workforce development work at Salesforce.org. So Salesforce.org is the social enterprise arm of Salesforce, a large cloud computing CRM company. And Salesforce.org is the arm of our company that does both the technology side of our business for nonprofits, K-12 schools and school districts and higher ed. And then also the social enterprise model is that the revenue from that business is what's fueling all of our philanthropy. And our workforce development work is really focused on preparing underserved and untapped young adults to be productive members of an equitable and diverse 21st century economy. So very aligned with the work that all of you are doing. And I've been doing this kind of work for my whole career, though in very different industries. And in my last job, I was working with Capital One, and we actually partnered with Virtual Enterprise on some of the work that all of you are doing. So I've seen it in action. I've been to the expo, which was like completely mind-blowing to me. And I'm excited to be here to talk to you today.
Great. And just John, or should we go Jonathan? Everyone else is on.
I feel now weird saying Jonathan because everyone else is going by the
No, we stay with Jonathan.
It's actually always been like Jonathan or Jay Stone, so like pick your but yeah, John never really, stuck. It's wonderful to be with you guys tonight. Jonathan Stone, head up travel partnerships in a team at Facebook called Facebook Marketing Partners. FMP, since that's a mouthful to say every time. FMP is kind of the ecosystem of all these different advertising, marketing. Salesforce is actually an example of a CRM technology that sort of all plug in to the ecosystem and help our advertisers and clients scale everything that they're doing on the platform. So I cover new business development for that, sort of onboarding and identifying the best and highest growth potential partners. Before this, I actually spent 4 years at Google. We did not overlap though. I think you were probably still in SF when I was in New York, and then made the move where I was doing global brand strategy on YouTube, large customer sales team with some of our cable TV clients, and then had some experience in startups, as well as I'm a recovering strategy consultant where I started my career. And when I was invited to tonight, I think sitting in front of a room full of kind of the future of America's youth is super exciting and an honor to be in front of you guys. So thanks for the invite.
All right. So Jonathan, we'll keep it with you then. Does a resume matter anymore?
Yes, absolutely. A few things that I always say on a resume. I actually love doing like resume revision for friends and kind of cover letter, whatnot for applications. One page. One page, please. Great joke because you know where to, if you want to like look for a place to bury a body, second page of a resume. Just no so I would say, I was wondering if that joke was going to hit. I'm glad it did. And then you know it's a joke. I think what I always say is I see a lot of friends come to me and they're like, I'm applying to business school, I'm applying to a job, can you help me with my resume? And once we have the one-page talk, we move into, it's not a job description. I see so many resumes, it's like, managed a team of 4 people in business planning. That's a description of what you did. Make it about an achievement. Pick 2 or 3 things from each job that you had, and it could be a very specific, tangible achievement that has ideally numbers behind it, increased sales by 25% quarter over quarter, longest running, consecutive seller to hit quota for 9 quarters in a row. That's an achievement versus description. The caveat is that it now is just one of many things that matters. You now have a whole online presence and employers are going to look for that. So make sure that your LinkedIn, which is your online resume, is completely up to snuff. I personally love having something called an About Me page. If you go to about.me, it's really awesome to just sort of have everything that I do, personal, professional. So yes, the resume is certainly important. I'd say it's still the most important, but make sure that you have it in addition to all the other places that your employer is going to come to learn about you, really kind of in lockstep.
Jen, how does that resonate with you?
So I truly wish that I could say that the answer was no, because I don't think, especially for talent that is not a traditional profile for many jobs, that the resume always does that talent the justice that it deserves. But I do think the answer is definitely yes. And I'm interested to see over time with kind of some new trends in hiring if that changes. I've been part of a process recently for a nonprofit board that I'm on where we've been trying to hire a new executive director. And we have actually used a resume-less process. Still getting a lot of the information that would be on a resume, but very intentionally to try to remove bias around gender, race, ethnicity, sort of pedigree in terms of university. But I think that is still really rare. And so I do think the resume still really matters. And I think we might get into this more, but as I think about even myself when I was in high school, I think there's a real concern, like how could I have a resume if I haven't had much experience?
Yeah.
And I think that I think you have to think, we all have to think beyond just sort of a traditional job. So certainly there are summer jobs, and there might be unpaid sort of experiences that a student is doing as an internship or even like a leadership role in a school, so extracurricular activities. There's no shame in things like babysitting and working as a lifeguard. Like all of those things matter, you build responsibility, you build accountability, and so I think even for a 17-year-old, many colleges, as you all would know better than I do, are asking for resumes, and I think that's part of what's a little scary. And maybe we can talk more about that as we get into it, but I think the short answer is yes.
Okay. And Ross? I mean, if this were American Idol, you would get 3 yeses.
He's the tough Simon Cowell judge.
Yeah, and I'm Simon Cowell. So, yeah, resume is incredibly important to any job interview that anyone's ever going to go to. I've never conducted an interview without the resume sitting right in front of me. Almost exclusively, the resume is what's used, like fire algorithms, we're going to get into that a lot later, to look and see, is this somebody that would actually fit the specific role that they're applying for. When looking at jobs, I even go as far, when I was looking, I think like 4 or 5 years ago when I was applying to Google, I was applying to a lot of different places. I was applying to like consulting jobs, marketing jobs, sales jobs, and for each one, I kind of had to tailor the resume to that specific job, because the resume is not just your experience, but it has to tell a story about you. So I always say, like, you should be telling a story with your resume. And as Jay Stone mentioned over here, you have to have like quantitative data. It's about the quality of the resume, but also quantitative. So you have to show your achievements. You have to show, numbers that can actually back up what is on your resume. And so when you think about like the digital world with LinkedIn and everything being digital now, you have to make sure that both like online as well as like what you're submitting match up, because even more so now, people are going to be checking on LinkedIn, they're going to be double checking, they're going to be looking on Google to find out Google to find out if this person is who they are, who they say they are on the resume. So a resume is probably the most important thing outside of like networking to kind of say, this is who I am.
So it's interesting. I want to use that to move into the next thing here, is how do you stand out? So we've talked about this resume. Maybe you don't have a great, a full set of experience and all these great things to say. And then now, Rob, touching on some of the things that you see, what are the things that stand out to you when you're sitting there in that interview room and then you got that resume pop in front of you? And then talk a little bit, maybe we can dive a little bit more deeply into some of the other things, the LinkedIn, the networking, the personal branding, about me, and how all those things come together.
Yeah, no, that's a really good question. I mean, I think part of like the Google process when we're like evaluating candidates and we're looking, how does this person stand out? We kind of look at a few things. The first thing is, does this person have the general cognitive ability to do this job? Are they technically able to do everything that we're asking them to do in this role? The second thing is, do they have the experience from that role? Is there a background that would show, and that's a lot, that we see from the resume, but also when we're asking them questions, have they done something like this in the past? Is their career trajectory in line with what this role is? Additionally, we'll kind of look at, is this person a leader? What are their strengths? What are they really bringing to the table that would make them stand out among other candidates? Are they going to be somebody that's able to lead the team, that's able to be autonomous and really bring that role, bring success to that role? And then finally, we evaluate, is this person a cultural fit for our team, for Google in general? And so those are kind of the things that we look at, and we're kind of evaluating, is this person stand out from the rest of the candidates? And if they kind of hit on all 4 of those things, then typically we'll be like, yeah, this person is somebody that should move on to the next round, somebody that stands out in my mind. And it's all about like a single thing, right? Like, I can still remember people that I've said yes to, and I remember exactly what they told me, whether it was a story about how there was some sort of business crisis, how they had to basically evaluate the situation, and what the story that they told me to sort of fix that crisis and come out successfully. And it's usually 1 or 2 things that really stick out, like a story or an achievement or something that they've done that I kind of hold on to, and most people hold on to be able to kind of move them along and have them stand out.
So Jonathan, leaning into that a little bit, around the storytelling piece, you talked about the about me and that type of thing. How important is that story, and how does a young person frame that story?
So I kind of break it down into, at least my own personal resume, which is granted going to be different than a high school senior's, professional experience, most recent to least, academic, and then personal. And I actually personally love the personal section as an interviewer, because great pedigree, awesome, really cool jobs that have demonstrated, quantitative and measurable success, great. but now I actually care, like if I'm gonna work with you, we're gonna spend a third of our working lives together, we should actually like each other. And I wanna know what kind of makes you up as a person, what are your interests, what are your hobbies. So I'm very open about that on my resume. That's something that I think definitely stands out because we live in such a multi-dimensional world right now that I think the more that you can show, yes, I bring my full self to work, but I'm actually I have interests and passions and things outside of the office. And then I would just reiterate here as far as standing out, just don't do the job description, do the job achievement. Pick the 2 things that really stand out that are gonna make the interviewer go, wow, there's probably a really cool story behind that. That's a first of its kind initiative, or you set the record at your company, or you had the longest consecutive streak, whatever the achievement might be, make it something that almost begs the interviewer to ask you, tell me the story behind that.
And so Jen, how does this square up with the workforce development angle and in preparation and think about this maybe from a strategy or systemic point of view?
Yeah, so I was thinking about it actually, as you think about coaching high school students, and the work that we do in the workforce development space is sometimes with in-school youth and sometimes with out-of-school young people, but I would say in general, what makes the population that we work most closely with stand out is not the academic pedigree necessarily. And so when I think about this question, I think about sort of 2 phases, because some of the things that we've talked about as the items that might stand out mean your resume has to get screened and get you in the door for an interview before Rob can have the story sort of moment with you. And so I think on a resume, and I think especially if I'm thinking about someone who hasn't gone to college and graduated with certain honors and had certain internships, I still think there are things that can make someone stand out. So it hasn't been said, I think it's probably stating the obvious, but I feel really strongly that there shouldn't be errors on it. So did someone take the time to look at it themselves, to ask a teacher, friend, mentor, cousin, whomever to edit it? I think, and is it formatted consistently? That is a reflection on someone's personal brand, and that doesn't matter if you're 16 or 66. I think looking at things like leadership and extracurricular opportunities while a student was in school, did they return, and this isn't always a perfect measure, but did they return to a certain job or experience, maybe 2 different summers, so they were asked back, the manager perhaps has endorsed them, maybe on LinkedIn, or I don't believe really in referrals or references rather on resumes, but you might get to that point. But I do think there are ways, even for someone who's 16 or 17 years old, to really think about the sort of personal brand. I also, and I'd be curious what my fellow panelists think, there's a lot of controversy over the cover letter, and I think it depends on the job, but at least when we hire, we cannot take for granted that people know how to write. And that's another place also for people to be able to sort of share something that's different than what they share on their resume, share why they're interested in a job, demonstrate that they can do something, and again, to their brand that doesn't have mistakes in it. And so sometimes jobs will ask you for it explicitly, sometimes jobs will explicitly say you don't need it, but I would err on the side if you can you have to upload a resume and then there's a space for additional documents. I think it's good practice to train on writing a cover letter, but I know that may not be, we may not have 3 yeses on that one.
I'd like to get the takes on that.
Well, what's interesting is when I first started at Google, we didn't even really accept cover letters. That wasn't something that was common practice. We literally had just a resume that you would submit, and if there was an employee that knew you, they would basically write a recommendation for you. I think recently we started accepting cover letters, but before that there was no cover letters. So the dreaded option is where you have an optional cover letter, right? And then you're sitting there saying, do I submit a cover letter? Do I not? What are other people doing? And I think in that case, it's fairly obvious that you should submit a cover letter. And a cover letter has very standard formats that most people can find online. And it also gives you an opportunity to stand out, right? If you have something a little different, if maybe you put a different twist to it, maybe something in your background that you can weave in. For cover letters that I've done in the past, I always try and tell like a unique story, that's something that's not, that might not necessarily be found from my resume. For example, my friends and I helped to start like the meme Tebowing. That's not necessarily something I put on my resume, but that's a funny story that we talk about that can like lead to really interesting conversations and really get the attention of somebody who's looking at the cover letter.
I personally don't use them. As an interviewer, if I see the optional, I perceive it as not optional and I submit it, but it's only after like, I can't believe I have to do this. So I would say like a really good solid resume should replace a cover letter. To me, a cover letter is nothing more than kind of rephrasing a whole bunch of the things that are already being called out in your resume and showing why they're applicable to the job you're applying for. It should already be sort of self-evident. So Facebook actually does not ask for cover letters. They do ask for like the personal recommendation if you are being referred. So if I would say if the job or college or whatever you're applying to asks for it, even if they list it as optional, you should do it as the interviewee. As the interviewer, I don't ask for them currently in my current company, and if I were starting a company, I would not ask for it there as well. And just, I want to remember one more point about the resume itself. It's a great little trick that I always recommend to any friend that I'm working with, which is if you print it out and then cover, kind of like take the right sheet and cover so you can literally only see the first word in the bullet. That should be the most impressive set of action verbs on the planet. Streamlined, supervised, spearheaded versus managed, led, did. Right? Like if it's just like a linking verb, and you guys are all teachers, so I'm sure you know linking verb versus action verb, right? Thank you for teaching me that. I would say like lean very heavily into action verbs and make sure that if you were just going to read that first word on the bullet, that it's super impressive.
So I'm going to skip around here because this gets me to the next question here. But how do you beat the bots, right? So you're talking about these action verbs and what have you, and we're hearing more about, we're reading more and more about, how the first round of interviewing is being replaced by AI. And I was wondering if you guys could either share experience, what you've seen, maybe you haven't seen it yet, maybe it hasn't really hit the application phase yet, but at least from someone who's leading a national program, I'm thinking about it. So how do we position ourselves and position young people to beat the bots? And for those of you that aren't aware, many of the first rounds of interviews are doing scanning of resumes and different types of keyword searches using artificial intelligence to help screen candidates and even drive that interview process all the way through. So I don't know if any of you guys have any thoughts to share on that.
I guess I'll start. Yeah, I mean the bots are a huge part of what we do at Google. I mean we have, I think, millions of resumes that are submitted each year for thousands of jobs, and there's no way for an actual human being to go through all those resumes. It's just not possible. And so we've leaned heavily on machine learning algorithms to basically like look at and evaluate whether or not a resume is going to be successful at the specific role. A lot of that has to do, and I'm not an engineer, so I'm just going to put that out there, that I don't know all of the technical aspects, but a lot of that is, does basically the resume match a lot of the keywords that are found in the job description? Is there quantitative data in there that we can pick up on that shows you've actually done something of quantitative purpose? And I think when you're thinking about that, like the best way to beat the bots is to network. It's as simple as that. If you network at Google and you have somebody refer you, you get a person to look over it, and you get a story told about you, and you have somebody refer you. I think networking is hands down the best way to get a job. I think that's how the vast majority of jobs are still gotten today, even though we talk a lot about a resume and how important it is. Networking is probably as crucial, if not more crucial, to finding a job. And so that's a great way to kind of beat the bots, is if you have somebody in the company that says, hey, I know Jay Stone, he's great, like here's what I know about him, like you should absolutely hire him. That's like the strongest thing you can do to beat the bots.
That's a great response. Any other thoughts on that?
No, I mean, I worry about the bots and the population that I think most about. I think when you, and I'm even farther from an engineer that is thinking about how these things work, but it makes me nervous sometimes that machine learning and AI are programmed to find people who look like the people who are already in the current job. And there's a real diversity challenge, especially in tech, and diversity of all kinds. And I think whether with machine learning or human recruiting, I think it is easiest to try to find people who are similar in their mold to those who have been successful in the jobs previously. And so I just hope that technology is really mind-blowing, and so I hope that AI and the bots can actually really help us navigate some of those challenges instead of perpetuate kind of continuing to hire in a pretty kind of cookie cutter way.
I would echo what Rob said. I think the best way to beat them is to not have to rely on them and to just know somebody where you're going. Like, I would say that at Google as well as at Facebook, there's sort of like internal candidates applying for the job, and I would say those probably have first dibs. Then there's internal referrals, and you have to imagine there's at least several dozen of those for top jobs. And then after that is the people that did not know anyone who was at the company that was willing to vouch for them to submit the resume for them. And so, like, if Pack A doesn't work, then they go to Pack B, and Pack B then they finally, and so very rarely do these companies, at least the large tech, I don't want to speak for every company, is going to hire from like an external candidate. And then I would just say, have many different versions of your resume that each customize and kind of map to the job that you're applying for. So in my most recent job search, I had like a business development leaning cover letter, partnerships leaning, sales, a marketing one, and then in every job, especially for the ones that I really wanted, that I was willing to put the time into, even if I knew the internal referral, I would still take literally like copy and paste keywords out of the job description and put it into my resume. Of course, assuming that I had done it, but like saying like, oh, they're talking about strategic partnerships. That's mentioned 6 times in the job description. I'm gonna now play up my strategic partnership experience in this version of my resume more than my marketing version, which might talk about my marketing experience.
That's excellent. And now taking all those things together, the networking, the different modalities of your portfolio and all of that. Rob, if I type in personal brand into Waze, is it going to give me the map on how to get there?
Unless that's a location, no.
So how do we get young people to that location of personal brand, right? And thinking about, is that all of those things, the network, the resume, the different cover letters, the story, all of that. So I'm just kind of riff on that for a moment.
Well, what's kind of scary in today's age is that personal branding, at least from a digital perspective, starts way, way, way earlier than it ever did when I was a child. Right? All of the things that they're doing from a digital perspective are things that can be found online, even with some of the privacy things and settings that you can put out. They're still building that personal brand and putting that out there. And I think as educators, that's something that's really important to discuss with the kids, to say, hey, look, like the way you're presenting yourself online, on social media, digitally, the way you present yourself in the classroom, the way you present yourself at interviews, all of those are a cumulative look at what your personal brand is. And you want it to be your strengths, right? You want it to be talking about how, hey, I'm a really hard worker, or I can do this job really well. I'm a fun-loving guy, like maybe with Jay Stone go skydiving and stuff like that, or parasailing, I don't know. But like all of those things are together, whereas, when you look at the past, it was always like you had a professional personality and then you had kind of your offline, like social personality, and now today more than ever, they're together. And so talk to your students about that. Begin building their personal brand. Talk to them about the importance of like putting their best foot out there, especially when they're being digital.
And Jonathan, you hit on that in our phone call in talking, and you hit on a little bit today about embracing all those things that you are, all those things that you do, and making that part of your personal brand. You want to just elaborate on that a little bit?
Yeah, this question really like rings home for me, because I remember in the early parts of my career, especially when I was in kind of these very conservative, buttoned-up corporate consulting firms, feeling like I almost had this like Clark Kent Superman alter ego, like literally get out of the office, and my most recent consulting firm was like 25 Broadway, so super close to where we are right now. And I would just be like, I'd loosen the tie, I'd undo an extra button, and I'd like rip the blazer off, and I'd be like, right? And like now, thank God, I feel like I work at a place that encourages me to bring my full self to work, and I don't have that kind of dichotomy between, you know, who I am outside of the office and who I am inside. I take my hobbies, which are predominantly beatboxing and yoga, and I bring that right into the workplace. And I have that all in my digital profile. So if you go to my LinkedIn, if you go to my Facebook, if you go to my Instagram, you're probably going to see like some weird inversion pose or something like that. And that is something that like has been brought up to me in interviews that has had the interviewer kind of feel like a connection to something beyond just my academic and my professional background. So be careful about what personal branding you're doing, right? It shouldn't be anything that's illegal, or right? I think this should hopefully go without saying, but like it should be something. I always remember growing up, my mom was like, don't do anything that you don't want if it was a headline on the front of the New York Times, right? How many of us have heard our parents, right? So like, I still think that that runs true, and now it's so much easier for people to find out the nitty-gritty details of our lives. Make sure that anything that is on your digital profile is something that you would stand by 100%.
And so Jen, when you're thinking about you know, young people and how you communicate that line to them, what are some things that go through your head?
I've seen some people sort of like nodding and with this resonating, and yet kids are kids and they don't always listen. And so, you know, one thing we bring a lot of young people from a couple different nonprofit training programs into Salesforce for internships. And these are all young people from low-income backgrounds. Some are headed to college, some are not. And as part of what we do, we run these like 3-day onboarding boot camps, and the nonprofits have done a lot of training with the young adults already, but our onboarding boot camps are really more about onboarding to Salesforce. And we've shifted almost all of them to be like highly interactive. And so on the personal branding piece, it's much more about show, don't tell. And so we pull up examples. I mean, not of people in the room, but you know, pictures or whatever it might be that are things that resonate with a 17-year-old, and that might be a reason that would cost them from getting a job. And it's like the laughter, the like awkward laughter, the like sort of like shrugging shoulders, like as if this really looks very familiar to them. It's not foolproof at all, but it is definitely, I think, more effective. And we have recruiters come in to do it, so the people that are doing hiring, I mean, as part of it, to talk about sort of processes and examples of things that they've seen. And on the flip side, and I would agree with everything that's already been said, this idea that it doesn't have to be that like every picture is this fake picture of you behind your desk at school, and that you can be yourself and, you know, have multiple dimensions to who you are, but that nothing is a secret. Something from 3 years ago is not gone. So that would be the only thing I would add.
And then, so I want to pivot that into staying with you, Jen, around thinking about that in terms of equity and access. A lot of teachers in this room are teaching a population of students that, you know, Google or Facebook or Salesforce is extraordinarly aspirational, right? So what are some of the considerations when, you know, we're struggling with a lot of different backgrounds, a lot of different elements to that, and what are some things that they can take away from this conversation?
Yeah, I mean, I think what's amazing about the fact that you're all here is that being part of this program is a huge step towards that. So I think there is still a pretty significant disconnect between education and careers in a lot of schools and classrooms, probably much less so in yours. But I think we talk a lot about sort of if you can't see it, you can't believe that it's true. And also, even if what you think you know, so like you ask your students, you know, what does it mean to work at Google or Facebook or Salesforce? And they think that it's a technology, they're all technology companies, which of course they are, but there are so many different types of jobs inside of all of our companies and every company that may or may not be technology jobs. And so, you know, I think this idea of kind of early exposure through programs like VE, but also bringing professionals into the classroom. And they don't have to, you don't have to find, and obviously you're all in very different parts of the country. It doesn't have to be a big flashy company. I think it should really be like a real array of jobs and industries and types of people, and people that have done 5 different things before they found the thing that they're most passionate about. But I think early exposure is really important. We're also really mindful when we do career panels, for example, that we don't bring a panel like of all white men into a classroom of young people where that doesn't really look like them. That's also harder to do. You have to like be more intentional about how you recruit for those things. But I think it also goes back to this idea of showing young people that look like them in jobs that they may or may not be interested in, but just this sense of possibility and early exposure and awareness. And I think, you know, again, encouraging your students, for example, to put VE on their resume. I mean, it has to be careful. It's not like they didn't actually run whatever honey company, you know, I think, but really explaining the role that they had in a business simulation for 9 months and what they were part of. And there's obviously, to the point before, around kind of quantitative metrics and how they did and the roles they had. I think all of that is you guys are 8 steps ahead because you're teaching what you're teaching.
Yeah, that's great. I appreciate that insight. I'm going to get to one more lighter question, and then I'm going to take some questions from the audience. But Rob, you went through the Google interview process, and now you interview people at Google, and Jonathan, you were at Google. So can you tell me, how much would you charge to wash all of the windows in Seattle?
I'm happy to go. So, has everyone seen the case interview? No? Okay, so this is what's called a case interview question. Very popular in consulting. They actually don't care if you know how many windows are washed in Seattle. It's all about just seeing how your mind kind of like assesses. So like, I would say, I'm so glad you asked. I've been thinking about this all day. Any sign of like, you know, oh crap, I have no idea to answer this. So I would just start saying, well, I'm going to assume that there are, let's say, 1,000 buildings in Seattle. And on average, they probably have 20 flat 5 floors each. So now we're at 25,000 floors. And I'm going to assume that each of these floors has figure 10 windows on each side. So that's 40 windows total for 4 floors of the average building. So that is 25,000 times 40, 1 million windows in Seattle.
And I would say
no idea if that's
$10
right
a window.
Right. Oh, so how much should I charge? Right. And $10 a window, so $10 million. Yeah.
But so how do you think about this? I think, I don't know if Google uses this type of process anymore, but let's say you are thrown that oddball question. How do you respond to that situation?
So, well, for one, I usually try, when I'm like interviewing or when I'm like looking at a candidate, what I always try and tell them is it's a marathon, right? You don't just get up one day and you run a marathon, right? When I was applying to jobs, I applied to over 100 jobs. I went to over 25 interviews. I got turned down from multiple places. And like at the end of the day, I came out with like 2 jobs, but it took me like 3 or 4 months. And so what like people typically don't understand is that you don't just get up and get a job. It's like a whole process. You have to like, first of all, put together your resume. You have to be networking, right? The digital, as scary as it is when you think of like a personal branding, or as awesome as it is from a personal branding perspective, it's also incredibly useful, right? You can go on LinkedIn, you can find out the hiring manager of the job that you're looking for, and you can see who you're connected to that can actually connect you to that person.